flavor, it's producing a different look. And when we light cannabis on fire, that fire is going to change a lot of the chemistry. So what we know is, a lot of the cannabinoids are changed. We have transformations of THC to CBT or to CBL. We have CBE that's really only formed during the smoking process. We have the classic CBN transformation from THC. But it's really, you're producing almost like 30 new cannabinoids during the smoking process. And,
we're Jug Dealers, we're the podcast you need in your feed. Teaching the game like you never seen. Jerin, Gabe, GRAMBO, true OGs. Masters of the globe, set your mind free. From Denver, Colorado, where the data's green. We set the data points for the SOPs. Jug Dealers Podcast, yes indeed.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jug Dealers Podcast, where we discuss all things cannabis and lifestyle related, brought to you by the good people at 5-8 and now available at jugdealers.shop and jugdealers.net for all your cultivation questions and needs. We're here for you.
Yes. You can also request samples, all kinds of stuff there. Again, you can obviously buy everything that you see that we talk about, all that fun stuff. But today it's definitely going to be something where we're going to, I think, dive into something.
Dude, we're going deep in the rabbit hole today.
And this is something where, I look forward to kind of just sitting back and
learning some things.
Learning some things, as a promise that we have to our listeners, which is always trying to really bring, practical knowledge, in an ideal situation where they can actually, turn the thing off and go right into their garden or right into their, using experience and actually get something from it. You know what I mean? And that's always been our goal, is to bring the knowledge that we have, but then also bring really high quality guests to bring the knowledge that they have. So without further ado, why don't you introduce our guest, Gabe?
So today, it is our pleasure to bring Dr. Riley Kirk to the studio from New Hampshire, right?
Yep.
Beautiful, beautiful country up there. We just came through there on an epic tour. Gabe and I did. It was quite a Mideast and Northeast tour, but cut right. I mean, everything's pretty close to you if you're in New Hampshire, right? Nothing's too far.
Yeah, everything's within a drive. It's not like out west where it's like, a whole day trip to go to another state. You can go through all the states in New England. And
I was going to say, you could do a whole day trip here and still be in the same state.
That's true. That's true. But beautiful country up there. I know you were talking a little bit about, it's some of the stuff that your husband does and some of the nature experiences you guys get up there, but truly a raw and beautiful area. So thank you so much for taking the time and sitting down and having a little chat with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm stoked to be here and share a little bit of what I'm doing and hopefully learn from you guys too. It sounds like you're just an absolute wealth of knowledge.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Let's start off with the basics, how we kind of get started with most of our guests. Where did you grow up? And, what's your first cannabis experience that you remember?
Yeah, so I grew up in Maine. I grew up around Sebago Lake, if you're familiar with Maine at all.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we know it well.
Oh, yes.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
Great
it's beautiful,
there.
super clean, just like absolutely gorgeous. It's where all of Portland, Maine gets their drinking water. Just a fun little fact there.
Didn't know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
But we've been water skiing on that lake, as I remember. Yeah, we know it well.
And went through the, all the way through that ham operated lock that you can from the other.
Locks.
Yes, we've been through those. Yes. So
unless it's a rainstorm, then they're not fun.
you know what? And I believe that. I totally believe that. But we had a little a cabin off Sebago one year, and so it was it was a great time. But I love that area, and it's definitely an idyllic part of the country that I'm sure was a wonderful, wonderful place to grow up with. And I mean, I would say Maine as a state, pretty cannabis friendly, even as you were growing up. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it was like legal and accessible via like dispensaries, but as far as the culture, it has always been pretty well accepted in Maine. Like I've had so many experiences, even with like law enforcement, where they might take your weed, they might make you like smash your bong, but they're not going to like put you in jail if they get if you get caught with cannabis, which was, obviously a luxury growing up, but also just the people I hung around with were very, very cannabis friendly. I have two older brothers and both of them are just certifiable stoners. The ones who taught me.
Nice. You went right into the second question before we even were your parents cannabis users too?
Yeah, I didn't know it at the time growing up.
Right.
It It became pretty obvious in high school. Like my dad was a straight up stoner, and my mom, she's always like dabbled, but she's more into like the low dose edibles, not like the Chief and Jay's kind of a stoner.
Sure. But obviously, cannabis friendly. No, so that's, and of course, I've always called Maine in that area, really the Humboldt of the East. You know what I mean? And obviously with I-95 and with a lot of the, the old school cultivation that's gone, and you obviously head south and you hit millions and millions and millions of people, really within, in effect, a stone's throw.
Maine's always been even doing fish tour and stuff like that. Like the cops in Maine were always super, super chill. They didn't care about anything.
Right. On another note, stone's throw is an excellent, lobster roll. It's actually in, I think it might be in Massachusetts, but anyway, so obviously a wonderful place to grow up. Where did your, as far as education and your interest kind of start moving into, what sparked that interest? And then even, from there, kind of, why don't you let us know a little bit about what your official background is?
Yeah. So what sparked my interest, I started using cannabis at 14 years old. So I was relatively young, but also our data suggests that's when most people start trying cannabis, between 14 and 15 years old. So it really isn't, that crazy. And I'm not necessarily advocating for it, but at the same time, if you're not using cannabis, you're typically using something else. It's not like it's, cannabis or abstaining.
You're not wrong.
So I do think it is a form of like harm reduction in a way, for younger people to gravitate towards cannabis over other things. I started using it at 14 years old. And from the second I first started smoking weed, like I just knew my brain just felt right using the plant. And, looking back now as an educated person, I used to have seizures. I have a very hyperactive brain, like ADHD type, but also like seizure types, hyperactive. So I always felt like cannabis just put my mind at ease and allowed me to focus and allowed me to think clearer and think better, which is so contradicting to what people tell you cannabis does to your brain. And, I never pictured myself in the industry. I never pictured myself researching the plant, but I was always absolutely fascinated with medicinal plants in general, with herbalism. I was always foraging growing up in high school and college, but I studied kind of traditional sciences, biomedical science. And that was kind of fun. It was cool, but I was like, this is kind of missing. Like, I'm not really passionate about this. And then I learned about this field of study called pharmacognosy, which is the study of natural medicines and how they can be used as drugs. So when I learned about this term, I started looking into grad schools because I essentially wanted to be an herbalist that understood the science component. Because my brain doesn't understand something unless I understand everything. Like I need to become obsessed with things and I need to understand the underlying mechanisms. So that's really where I got my proper education, is in pharmaceutical sciences, specializing in these natural medicines. And I studied dozens, if not hundreds of different natural products, everything from bacteria to fungi to, tons and tons of different medicinal plants that have been used in traditional medicine. And all through my studies, I was just a stoner. I was just a stoner scientist. I was very well known for being
fantastic.
Riley's a stoner, So again, I never thought of this as my career, but towards the end of grad school, the school released a program, which was cannabis studies, and they needed a teaching assistant for it. And everybody was like, oh, well, Riley should be the teaching assistant. She already knows everything about this. And so I was like, I was chosen for it, essentially with no competition. And
it was like, this is your position.
Oh, literally, they're like, this was meant for you.
They're like, we created a position for you. Take it.
I started making these educational videos for the course to help teach the course, teaching people about how cannabis works in the body, the endocannabinoid system, the different chemistry, the pharmacology of cannabis. And people loved the videos. The students are like, wow, these are so engaging. This is such a great way to learn. And then around that same time, social media videos and education on social media was getting really big. And I learned how much the school was charging for these courses. It was like $7,000 to learn about this stuff. And I'm like, shouldn't every stoner know about this? Shouldn't everybody know how cannabis works in the body? Like it would make us more educated consumers. It would help us choose products better. So I started making these educational videos on social media, and the feedback was just so positive. Like people had been just itching for this information. And I really enjoyed making the videos too. So that's really where my career started as far as like an educator in the cannabis space. And eventually I decided that my ethos weren't really in line with academia and I needed to, choose something more industrial focused.
Right. No, that's, I love how organic that story, started. And it's something that I've always felt like people that, are in inspiring positions and inspiring people, they always have that same kind of story. Well, it's funny story, and just having that opportunity. But yeah, it's like, I didn't really meant to do, but just being opportunity based and understanding that sometimes something comes and chooses you, you may not choose it, and I've always been a strong believer in, who's controlling who, in the botany of desire kind of thought process. Yeah. And, really just believing in plants being special is, being an autotroph as opposed to being, us being a heterotroph, and how that, allowed, just this whole thing to work, you know what I mean? And, and we say it all the time, plants were here before us and they're going to be here after us. I don't consider myself a grower. We like to call ourselves plant janitors. They're doing the growing. They're much more highly evolved than we are. And really, when you talk about, cannabis and terpenes and the different things that it does and oil production and some of these, positive stresses to then, maximize what's of horticultural significance, which is the oil. And then having an understanding of there is a cannabinoid system, there's like not even, to your point, hasn't been very long that now I would consider that to be within the community, more common knowledge. But it hasn't been common knowledge for very long.
Well, we weren't ever taught about it, and medical professionals weren't taught about it either. So even if you went to your doctor about using medical cannabis, they weren't educated on the subject either. So, how would you learn? We can't talk about this on social media without getting censored. We used to be able to talk a lot more about it, but right now, literally they're stopping us from every angle for being educated on this. So we kind of need education from within the community. And I just also wanted to say to your point of like, I'm a big believer in, you kind of get what you get out of the world. And for a long time, it was not safe to be a loud and proud stoner. And I do think I just kind of approached it at the right time where it was safe for me to be, really loud and proud in graduate school. And that led to where I am. But I also fully realized like not everyone's in that position that they can be that open about their plant use.
That's a special position and special opportunity. And again, you were, they're very honestly living your life. And again, the organic aspect of it really is fascinating to me. You know what I mean? And again, I truly, who's controlling who? So it's like, it's something where, somebody has to be, a martyr of sorts, right? Somebody has to show their face. Somebody has to, have the pardon my French, the balls to do it. You know what I mean? And so kudos to you for putting your face out there, because still when you started doing it and trying to be educating and everything, it's not always, a safe space. There are people at times that are watching that
easy to get blacklisted, even, I've been cultivating commercially since 2010. And, my ex-wife she's still in education at CU. And it was always, hey, what does your husband do for a living? Oh, he does construction. There was no discussion of, oh, he runs a cannabis grow. Like that wasn't, nobody that she works with wants to hear that stuff because there's such a stigma in education as far as oh no, and one thing that we're definitely about promoting is the successful stoner, the stoner who has a PhD, who works out every day, who does all these different things, as opposed to the, stereotypical stoner that's, sitting on the couch playing video games. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's a whole group of us who, like you were saying, like we almost use it to self-medicate. I'm pretty keen to point out to folks that like we have cannabinoid receptors in our body for a reason.
Yeah.
And like
didn't happen overnight either.
And cannabis is, a dinosaur plant. It just happens to still be here. But like there was a point where, we were very intertwined with the plant as far as human and using the plant on a daily basis.
And trading with it. There's a reason that the word, cannabis is one of the oldest unwritten or unchanged words in written language, period, because it's traded between languages and between cultures. So you can't have all these slang terms for it. If it's within just one culture, then literally generation to generation, it's going to be called something different, right? But if it's a major traded commodity, which it was for thousands of years, the word's got to be the word, so we know what we're doing here. You know what I mean? So,
and I just love the point of being like a, functional and productive stoner, whatever you want to call it,
sure.
because, I'm very open about the fact that I would not have finished my PhD without cannabis. I would not have started my PhD
Right.
without cannabis.
Right.
I would not have written my dissertation. And I published over 12 papers in grad school. I was one of the most productive students in my cohort.
Wow.
Because what I do is I use cannabis, and then I love learning and I love doing research. Like cannabis really ignites this thing in my brain that just like craves more and more and more information. And, when I'm not using cannabis, that's when I'm kind of just like zombie and chill.
Well, it's like, right. It's the idle hands thing, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, you got to keep rocking. And I will say for myself as well, I have a degree in horticultural food crop production, and I was a heavy cannabis user. You know what I mean? Whether it was, during studying, before tests, between classes, but part of it was like, it helped me just settle down and like at times be okay being at home on a Friday night when everybody else was out partying. And anybody that knows me, I like having a good time. You know what I mean? But
there's no shortage of good times with Jerin. That is true.
So, sorry. But, it definitely helped me just like mentally lock in and, definitely focus more. And I think when you call it medicine, I think that can mean medicine on so many different, levels, and obviously whether it's being used topically, whether it's, how you're consuming it, and whether it's more of, for specific, pain or to get off of pharmaceuticals, or if it's just more of a mental medicine, what I mean, which I think it really is, for a lot of people. So where did you study at exactly?
Where or when?
Well, how about both?
So I started grad school in, I think it was 2015.
Okay. Yeah.
And I studied at the University of Rhode Island. And the reason I chose that university, actually, there's two reasons. One, it was the closest program to my house in Maine. And at the time, my dad was undergoing chemotherapy and cancer treatment. So I wanted to be within driving distance. I didn't want to go to California and have to be, this long plane ride away from him. But also they had this really beautiful medicinal plant garden called the Heber W. Youngkin Medicinal Plant Garden. And I wanted to study medicinal plants. And none of the other universities had any practical aspect to do that. And when I arrived there, this garden has been there for decades. And obviously I'm spending every moment I can in the garden. And I realized that nobody's ever studied the garden at this university. And I was like, this was not part of my PhD. It was technically a side project, but I ended up extracting almost every plant in that garden and analyzing it through these different bioassays and these learning different. And this is why I was in the lab till midnight every night. Cause I'm like, this is so cool. Why is nobody doing this? This is free research time. This is amazing. So that medicinal plant extract library that I built there is still being used for research, which is really, really cool that awesome. Legacy kind of lives on.
You've given us a new place to go visit when we're in Rhode Island,
I would totally.
We're plant nerds.
I would totally love to check that out.
Because I'm still very close with the woman who runs the garden, and she'd be more than happy to give you a tour.
Oh man, don't threaten us with a good time. And I love Rhode Island. I love Providence. I love it's a fun fun little state, that's for sure. One thing that kind of came to mind too, we had done, we've been working with getting some products down in South Africa, and just recently, had a interview that we did with the gentleman that lives right there in Plettenberg Bay, that happens to be one of the highest densities of medicinal plants anywhere in the world, most of which are endemic. Not sure if you've ever heard of it, but if you haven't, if you want to go down a little rabbit hole, I'll send you some information on it. But definitely an amazing area. I stayed a couple nights out there and was just yeah, pretty incredible, pretty inspiring.
Hey, Grambo, you mind sliding that up just a little bit?
So once you got done, with your research and everything else, I mean, at that point, has it pretty much been, are you doing mostly consultant work? Is it an educational thing? Where, what are you doing today, and what kind of, stuff plans do you have, for the future and expanding, your specific knowledge and education?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm not doing mostly consulting work. I never found that to be very fun for my type of brain. But,
I get it.
So my first job in the industry was actually studying smoke chemistry and understanding like what chemistry was happening during the smoking process, because what we learned was 80% of consumers preferred smoking. And every physician in the world is going to tell you nobody should smoke. Everybody should dry herb vape or edibles, blah, 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 blah. But most people who are using it medicinally are still smoking. So there's definitely some aspect there that we haven't studied yet of the unique aspects of the smoking process. And that was my first job research position outside of graduate school. And I worked there for a couple of years. And then later on, when things kind of fell apart there, I worked with, hemp formulations, topical formulations, as a formulation chemist, because that was a lot of what I did in graduate school as well, is studying formulations and how well these different formulations penetrate the skin and have different medicinal aspects. But then I ended up starting or co-founding a nonprofit for research and education for cannabis, because essentially what we realized is the consumers were always left out of the conversation. It was always academia and industry doing research, and it never really was communicated to the consumers, and the consumers' opinion was never really respected in research. And in our opinion, consumers are experts, especially stoners, whereas the traditional systems have always kind of treated stoners as these stupid drug addicts that shouldn't be involved in anything. And to us, we're saying all of this knowledge is locked in all of these consumers' experiences and brains, and we really should be leveraging them more for information to learn about their experiences and then document them and then publish them as well. So what we do now through our nonprofit is combined lived experience, which is what I'm talking about with consumers, as well as we study the endocannabinoid system in the laboratory, specifically with whole plant formulations.
Amazing.
So most research that's done on the ECS involves just like one single molecule and one single target, just like all pharmaceutical stuff that we're studying. It's just super simplified. But we know that cannabis is not simple. We know that the human body is not simple. So our goal is to research this complexity. And it's really, really hard to research, but our goal is to find new ways to research it and to understand these synergies, this entourage effect at a deeper level, but also while including consumers in that research. So we have like a million different projects going on, which I'm happy to talk about, as many of them as we want to, but that's kind of where our overarching goals are, is like to really include consumers in research, and any research that we do to make sure that we're communicating it back to consumers so that they're kind of in the loop with what modern research is going on and how they can apply that to their everyday lives.
That's amazing. And it's one of the things we've actually, and I think GRAMBO maybe coined the term, but anecdata, right? Because we always said anecdotal data, and people have always been critical of that. But reality is it is data, and I'm not now, and that's not the whole thing, but it's a piece of the pie. And I love how I like that is to me very inspiring.
You just touched on so many things that I have been saying for years. And I've kind of said, hey, I need someone who's got a PhD to really be able to dive into these topics, because the reality is, one of the things I wanted to ask you is to kind of explain that, some of your findings in the chemical complexity of cannabis smoke and why it's significant. But one thing that I touch on quite a bit is extracts. And, so I'm 100% with you. To find any doctor who's going to tell you to smoke anything and that's going to be a healthy thing, that's not a real thing.
Right.
Because we discuss, possible legalization with the FDA, in which I'm like, look, the recommended method of ingestion will probably be edibles, but the reality is something something I've noticed as an extract user is, for the longest time, people were glowies. They were smoking red hot dabs.
Ooh.
And one thing, one thing I explained to people is like, look, terpenes, which are hydrocarbons, convert to different aldehydes. They can convert to benzene as low as like 400 degrees. So the reality is then it becomes, pretty heavily carcinogenic, in which I'm very much about the temperature that you are ingesting your dabs at, or whatever, whatever your extract. My extract of choice is BHO, rosin, regardless. The temperature is very important, because that is going to, we did a whole episode on terpenes in which, we want people to understand that like terpenes are what modulate the effect. Smoking something that's 30% THC, but has no terps, whereas smoking a haze that's maybe 17% THC with 4% terps and heavy in the myrcene, and stuff like that. So do you mind just kind of like maybe expanding on that the way that probably you only can?
Yeah. And I would always, just as a slight little addition to that, like how that is navigated, the medicine and smoking thing, and maybe even a little bit more with like the youth, right? Because we obviously have, has been drilled into several generations how bad smoking is, period, right? We've got, most of us have kids. This is something that we're all going to have to navigate. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have kids, and it's something where, we've obviously worked to normalize the plant. I know that's something in Colorado we've been, kind of all of us have been this whole like, hey, let's just make it normal. It doesn't mean you sit there and, burn out the car with the kids in there, but you wouldn't do that with cigarettes. It's, there's a certain respect level, obviously, but like, hey, let's not, let's step out of the shadows and into the light. So just, as a slight addition to that, I'd love to kind of get your take.
Oh yeah. There's so much to talk about here.
Lots to unwrap.
Yeah. So when we think about heat, whether it's smoking or vaping, kind of what you're talking about, dabs or smoking and lighting it on fire with a lighter, that heat is acting as a catalyst in every case. I mean, I always use the example of like your raw onions versus your caramelized cooked onions. It's producing different flavor. It's producing a different look. And when we light cannabis on fire, that fire is going to change a lot of the chemistry. So what we know is, a lot of the cannabinoids are changed. We have transformations of THC to CBT or to CBL. We have CBE that's really only formed during the smoking process. We have the classic CBN transformation from THC, but it's really, you're producing almost like 30 new cannabinoids during the smoking process. And, those aren't like organically produced in the plant enzymatically. They're produced via that fire and heat. Wow. Same thing with terpenes though. And we still don't know a lot about terpenes, whether they're lit on fire or whether they're eaten like in a gummy, what's actually happening post-metabolism. We haven't really studied terpenes to that extent yet. But I would say, yes, terpenes are incredibly important for the cannabis consumer experience. If anyone's ever tried dabbing straight THC distillate, it's a really hollow experience. It's not
fun.
Cannabis.
It's not fun.
No, it's like a pharmaceutical. It's almost
I'm
like
not into it.
Kind of like, out of it and not a positive way, where the terpenes can really guide that experience. And that's where it becomes personalized medicine is, what terpene profiles do you gravitate towards? My brain really likes the like Jacks and hazes and terpinolene dominant type varieties, because again, I have like a really hyperactive brain. So I like, really kind of stimulating varieties, but that's not great for everyone, because for other people that gives them an anxiety attack. So I wouldn't just straight up recommend that for everyone. Just my brain's not very anxiety prone. So that's okay for me to consume. But at the same time, terpenes are important for that flavor and effects. But unfortunately, when we say terpenes are important, sometimes the cannabis industry goes a little hard with that information. And if you've ever seen vape carts that are like, 30, 35% terpenes, I'm always like, that's probably not safe, actually. Like that's
you can clean your counter with that.
They're getting like headaches, or it's making them really astringent-y feeling, or something like that. Know, and I always advocate for what I call the natural ratio. And the plant is only going to produce things in a ratio that makes sense. It's not going to do things excessively. So when we have full plant extracts, the way the plant intended them to make, I think that's a reasonable safety level. But when we start to add in these egregious amount of terpenes, I think that's where the industry needs to chill a little bit, because it has not been shown to be safe to consume that much terpenes. So, terpenes are important, but like to a specific level.
You can't overdo it.
Well, and I mean, I would assume you wouldn't want to overconsume any hydrocarbon. And that's the thing. I think that's where, again, I think where people miss that is that, again, terpenes are hydrocarbons, butane's a hydrocarbon.
Well,
too much of anything is going to be bad.
And I think, unfortunately, and this is what's kind of, affected our industry a lot as well, is that people, know there's not a lot of cigarette smoking anymore, but there's a heck of a lot of vaping, and all of it's flavored, right? So I like that has polluted.
You're not wrong, bro.
That has polluted our industry. You know what I mean? Where to the point where you have a decent section of users that have never actually been, not legally consumed cannabis, right? And that they're used to these and want these high flavor, type of things. So it's, again, Gabe and I talk about it all the time, you can, believe it's one way and like it one way and want it to be one way. But the reality is you have to look at what the market's, going
As
for.
much as I hate to say it, the most popular SKU in Maryland is like raspberry ice flavored distillate carts.
Yeah.
And like, that's not, for me, I smoked one of those and I'm like, this is absolutely disgusting. Let me ask you a question. What are your thoughts on cannabis derived terpenes versus using the lab derived terpenes, I guess? Like, I mean, technically they're still hydrocarbons and
obviously you being an advocate of, full plant natural ratio, I thought that was really well put. I really appreciate that, because it's something where I think some people, full spectrum, this, that, but natural ratio. I really liked how you put that. And it's not something I've heard directly put like 100%. That, even though it's like so obvious.
I made that up. That's why.
Yes, of course.
Well, and look, you're not wrong though. Like plants are going to get it right on their own,
Yeah. I'm such an advocate of that.
If you're using the medicine because we trust the plant and love the plant, then let's practice that. Let's trust the plant.
Yes.
Like, let's not keep manipulating it to a degree where it does taste like, cotton candy, bubble gum, whatever. Like that's not what the plant intended. And also, like, the reason, back to smoking versus vaping, like I'm never going to tell people how to consume. I think every consumption method has its time and place. I think they're all tools. They produce different chemistry. It's a really unique thing to dive into. But at the same time, I think smoking, specifically not smoking pre-rolls, but learning how to break up a nug, to roll it up, to practice going outside, to have the whole process, I think is very therapeutic for people. And especially for people who maybe have more of addicting personality, where if they have a vape cart, they're just going to chief on it 24/7.
Oh yeah. Well, we've all seen it.
Smoking and like having to roll up every time is kind of an intentional, unintentional way of just slowing down your consumption a little bit and giving yourself a little more time to be like, do I need to smoke right now? Do I want to smoke right now? What's my brain telling me? Versus the vapes. I mean, this is why I don't vape. It's like, I'll just be driving and just be like, just hitting it for no reason. And it's like, what am I don't need
Grandma's behind the mic.
Grandma's behind the mic with the pen.
I literally, you're mirroring my own thought. This is very good for me. I'm not on camera, but I'll speak real quick. I have these thoughts of like, maybe I shouldn't be chain smoking it. So you're giving me the little nudge to like, put it down.
Put it down. But and I love, and also what interests me, obviously with having such a long history with cannabis as humans and having this cannabinoid system that's, obviously been proven and all these things, it does make me wonder, because the selection process through those thousands of years and everything else has been obviously directed around smoking. That was the only, whether it was extract, and natural hashes or whatever, it doesn't matter. It was all smoked, so it does make
shared. It was shared in circles. It was shared in ceremony. It was shared, with these purposes of like, there's so much more medicinal aspect when we think of it like that. Of, for a lot of people, like, it's very difficult for them to open up their feelings and their emotions unless they're using cannabis. And I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with my friends over a joint that we would not have had just like sitting on the couch, without that medicine. But it really can be kind of this community aspect that helps tie people together too.
100%. And I mean, it's like, how many people have you met? You know what I mean? I can literally think of it. I won't go in the whole story, but at my cousin's wedding, meeting a guy, in the parking lot that literally changed the trajectory of my whole life. You know what I mean? And like made me sitting where I'm sitting right now. You know what I mean? So interesting story. Maybe we'll get into someday, but it's I think that's what we've always loved too. And one of the things maybe that I truly loved about cannabis to begin with was the connection in people, and the connection with music and the connection of these places, especially when, at a time of prohibition where you couldn't just consume comfortably everywhere. You couldn't just be rolling down the road hitting a vape pen. You were in these safe spaces and connecting with people and feeling music and
that's
emotion.
That's what the Rastas always believed, was that the plant was here to bring people of unlike minds together.
Sure.
I'll never forget driving through Philly, and we're on Broad Street, and there's a couple guys smoking a blunt in the car next to us, and they pass us the blunt in traffic. They pass us the blunt.
Philly, baby.
And these are two dudes that we never would have talked to in any other circumstances, but because we see them smoking, we were like, hey, and so it's just one of those things.
Well, and
where
I
find out people smoke weed, and you're like, oh yeah, let's smoke some weed together. This is a good way to.
And let's just say I've been in some tough neighborhoods before where it's like, okay, we need to make sure everybody knows we're cool.
Yeah,
let's roll up a big fatty.
If we just smell like weed, if we just smell like weed, that's our trick in New York when we're walking through New York. We're like, everybody behind us will know we're cool because we're smoking weed, and a couple of them might even stop us to smoke our weed.
Yeah. So. That these days, that's a danger. But I really love, and I guess I've thought about how to navigate this medicine versus smoking and things like that. But I've never taken the thought process to the next level and think like, well, maybe, from a relationship and an evolutionary aspect, like that's how we've selected it. So maybe really, as it currently stands, maybe that is the best way to consume. I don't know. It just has got my mind thinking.
And who knows if there is like a best way to consume, even people who love dabbing, like that can still be a community medicine too. It doesn't need to just be smoking. And I think all of these spaces, they exist everywhere. And I think that's kind of the beautiful thing about cannabis is we don't all need to consume the same way, but there is space for everyone always.
Yep. I always pick hash mainly. And it's funny because I say to folks, the biggest reason I pick hash is just because, especially at the temperature that I'm ingesting it at, it's like butane filters it's got all the fats, waxes, lipids, everything out. All you have is cannabinoids and terps, in which if you're burning that, I usually am taking dabs at like 450. I mean, I'll be at parties, people be like, you really want to hit it that low? And I'm like, yeah, I'll take two.
Yeah. The flavor is amazing. Like you really can taste strain differences, I think, really well with those types of extracts. If that's what you're into and analyzing, I think it's a great way to consume.
And, and it's definitely something that, as extraction technologies have continued to progress, I feel like it's a very interesting area where even from a selection standpoint, being able to use that because of the taste and things like that. One of the things, is there anything that like really, really in your cannabis research specifically that jumped out to you? It's just like a surprise discovery that you go, well, gee, I wasn't really expecting that. I know you kind of spoke about all these other cannabinoids that are created after combustion, which honestly, that's some information that I definitely didn't have or didn't know anything about. Is there anything maybe even further on that subject or anything else that's come up that you're like, wow, that was very unexpected.
Didn't see that coming.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've learned through our research, you brought up edibles earlier and how that might be the way that most physicians might recommend that people consume. Something that we found out is around 16% of people can't feel edibles at all. And I'm sure everyone listening to this knows somebody who can't feel edibles, maybe knows a few people who can't feel edibles. And we were the first people to ever learn this statistic. And we ran these data points multiple times through thousands and thousands of people. We have about 20,000 data points now that show that around 16% of people can't feel
How much
edibles.
were you feeding these people? Like 1,000 milligrams? Because I can tell you right now, I could eat I'll eat 50 milligrams. I will be face down. And it's something I always explain to people. I say, look, regardless of your body constitution or whatever. And meanwhile, my girlfriend, she's this tiny little thing and she'll eat 100 milligrams and be like, you want to go to a party? Let's hang out. And I'm like, face down.
About your brain receptors. It's not about that. It's about how your body processes that THC and all about these specific liver enzymes that we have that process every drug, everything that we put into our body. Some people's bodies have really low efficiency or no efficiency at processing that THC. So it never actually reaches the brain or doesn't reach the brain to high levels. So people literally can consume a gram of THC and not feel anything, whereas other people can consume 10 milligrams who might be really
zooted. Yeah, I'm that guy. I'm that guy. Zooted. Yeah, that's me. And it's funny because whenever I'm trying to explain this to people, like I fly a lot, and they'll ask what I do,
right?
And we'll get into this conversation. Whenever I try to explain that to people, I go, look, I smoke hash. Like I smoke concentrates all the time, all day, from when I'm up to when and like you would figure like if it was alcohol, like that would translate to me having some type of, tolerance. Right. Whereas again, it does not matter if I eat edible, and it's the same thing. It's funny because same thing with mushrooms,
right?
Like when I take, we have some buddies out here that make very good metered doses, but when I can take next to nothing and I'm definitely feeling it. And then one of my buddies he's like, I took 3. I didn't really feel that. Is it the same? Have you been able to study other compounds like that as well?
We have not been able to study other compounds like that yet. And we still do have like a lot of limitations to what research we can do. But, that's something that we want to get into the literature. We're writing that up for peer review so that other people can also take that information and study it more. But I think this is kind of part of a bigger conversation that I talk about a lot, which is what I call the expanded entourage effect. We talked about smoke chemistry. That's different than vape chemistry. When we eat an edible, all of those compounds are being metabolized and that's producing a different entourage of molecules. So when we have people who like really prefer one consumption method over another, it's likely because their body's responding better to whatever that entourage is of that consumption method. Yeah. We always talk about the entourage effect of a specific strain, but we're not really talking about it in the form of consumption method, but it matters so much about how we're going to feel and how a specific person's going to react to that medicine.
So my mushroom buddy, when he was just here earlier this week, he was saying he actually processes it. So it actually goes from psilocybin to psilocin. So it's actually kind of pre-activated, we'll say.
Nice.
But then
like lemon teching?
Yep.
More or less. Yep.
Yeah. And he actually combines it with lion's mane and
reishi, maybe?
No. Precot was it I can't remember I need to see the jar for the third one. But then he was saying they actually do these honey sticks as well. And he was saying how because there's some enzymes in the honey that activate the psilocin different. So the effect if you took 2 grams of the pill, it would affect you differently than 2 grams with the honey because of the enzymes. So
I found that very interesting. I found that very interesting as well.
This dude's now doing really neat shit.
I guess so and again, I had never really made this, this
I see your brain just firing today.
Even with alcohol, right? There's some cultures that can clearly consume alcohol that have a history of alcohol, and then there's some cultures that don't and clearly can't. The British, I got a good British liver, okay? I'm from the UK.
My stepdad's British. He can put down some serious liquor.
So, but then there's some people that clearly and we all, again, kind of common knowledge is like, oh, well, they're, they same thing. They don't have or enough or any of that enzyme in their liver. It actually profits
it is typically, they will get breakout in a form of hives.
Right.
A lot of people consume alcohol there.
Is there have you seen any of the same, because now it's got me thinking, well, hell, okay, so there is the same kind of thing
that's happening. Are there markers you're saying?
Well, and there's the same kind of thing that's happening when you're consuming edibles as well with cannabis, right? It's and I had never really considered that. Now, have you seen any cultural aspect to that as well? Or do you have enough data points to really get into that? Because that's if you think about cultural, okay, I can see that tie with alcohol, but anyway, please go on.
So we do have all of the demographic data corresponding to that data set, and we are not finding any correlation with any subset of people specifically. So that likely means that it is more genetic. It has to be one of these. They're called the cytochrome P450 enzymes in the liver, and there's many different forms. So I think it is very, very possible we could have a genetic test for it in the future so that people don't need to figure out that they need to eat 600 milligrams of THC. Because also, this is the power of education. I've had people reach out to me and say, hey, thank you so much for talking about this, because I used to consume 600, 800 milligrams of THC, and I used to get really bad migraines from it because they weren't getting high, but they were getting adverse effects from it. And they didn't know it was correlated to those super high dose edibles. So, they were just reaching out and being like, thanks for talking about this, because I literally had no idea that this was
This has definitely opened up some things.
Is that a thing? Can I ask? Because I take super high dose edibles, and in my 40s, I've started waking up with headaches sometimes. And I'm like, is that the edibles? Is that a common thing?
Well, Josh,
we're just learning about it. So I don't know like how common it is, but it may be worth trying to lower that dose and seeing if you still do get headaches after.
I mean, again, this is, and again, we claim to be, decently bright young men, or not that young anymore, but
almost 50, bro. Come on.
But like, this is, and we really try and keep ourselves educated on a variety of, subjects, cannabis specifically, but this has definitely opened my mind to a number of different areas and rabbit holes and thought processes that I had not had before.
So
I'll also say that like a lot of what we learn is from social media, which sounds maybe a little not smart in the way that we're finding out things, but like the way we first learned that so many people weren't feeling edibles is I was creating content, educational content on edibles, and all the comments were like, man, I wish I could feel them. Man, I wish that there was a product that I could feel. I would love to take edibles. And we're like, whoa, that's like a lot of people commenting that. So that kind of led to this first study where we're like, we need to research this, because if you were strictly in academia and you were never talking to cannabis consumers, you would never know that data.
You would never know that. And again, going that anecdata, I always love that when Josh first dropped that, because it's something where we go, well, yeah, I mean, and even when we were in Holland, right, there was a few things with Wageningen University and some of the tests that they had done that were like very obvious to us. We had known, okay, if you're growing at 85 degrees versus 78 degrees, you're going to lose some terpenes, some things like that. These are things that we knew anecdotally and we had seen and we had grown and seen with our own eyes and through other gardens, but had never had any proof, never been on paper.
But I'm pretty keen to point out to folks that like, most of the stuff that we have unbelievable amounts of data on is, I use corn as my main example, in which there's entire universities with entire graduate programs with people like you, except lots of them who are just studying one thing on corn.
Right.
And it's not just one university, it's all kinds of universities. And here we are messing with how many different cultivars, all these different things, even when we were dealing with the guys over at Wageningen, we asked them, how many cultivar you got in there? Two. That's it. Because, and not for nothing, there's so many, you got gelato, you got Skittles, you got diesel, you got all these different things in which, one of the rabbit holes that I really kind of wanted to address with you is my biggest thing is, I've had this dream in my mind, because I'm so into extracts, that we would be able to like take everything and fraction all these terpenes off, and literally someone could go into the store and have them literally someone mix them a pen, almost like a pharmacist, where they could be like, I want this, and this. The reality is we have such a lack of understanding of our own endocannabinoid systems. My question is, how close are we? Like my thing has always been, I would love it if people could, let's say, you could take a test, you could categorize yourself into, let's say, an A through F endocannabinoid system. And then you could go into a dispensary and go, hey, I'm a type D endocannabinoid system, and I'm looking for I want a pen that's going to make me hungry. I want a pen that I can use to climb 14ers. I want a pen that I can go to sleep.
I think that's, honestly, it's almost dumbing it down too much. And again, I'm a trust the plant kind of guy. I don't like trusting humans. Do you think
that's a possibility?
I don't like trusting humans.
That's my question.
Yeah, no, I do want to talk about this, because I've seen brands claim that they can do a DNA test for your endocannabinoid system.
Interesting. Had not heard that.
And something that I think about a lot as somebody who studies this system is the system is incredibly dynamic. It's changing through the day. It's changing through a woman's cycle, through hormonal cycles, whatever it is. Like literally your level of receptors and enzymes and the actual endocannabinoids. So in my opinion, if you were to just submit your DNA or whatever and be, you're an F type endocannabinoid person, I think that would just be a snapshot. I don't think it would be really an indication of who you are all the time, and you might need more of like
who you are all the time. That's really interesting.
Dude, that's so, you just took everything.
Sorry, dude, it's not happening, bro.
Yeah, you took everything I've thought for years and years and years and just sunk my battleship.
No, people are working on this though, because people do want, you guys started off talking about the indica sativa hybrid issue, right, and how that's not necessarily an accurate way to describe the plant, but also nobody's thought of a better way to communicate it. So
true. You're not wrong.
No.
It's still the gold standard, because what are we supposed to say? We overcomplicate things a lot in the industry, and it's just not accessible to a general consumer. So until we have something that's just as easy as that, we're not going to replace those terms in the industry.
And I also think that, to your point, Gabe, it's, and this has got to be something it's either frustrating or what keeps you truly motivated. The fact that every answer that you get, you just create 10 more questions. Right. And that's like,
I love it.
I thought that might be the case. Because, but that's science, right? It's building blocks. It's isolating variables and being able to be repeatable and all these different things. Right. And that's a process. That's time, and even like, when people say, oh, I've done a big pheno hunt, it's like, what, 1,000 beans? It's like a typical wheat trial starts with 1 to 2 million individual. You know what I mean? So it's, and again, to your point, it's like the amount of research that would truly have to go in to even get anywhere close. And it's so dynamic. I'm not sure we could ever get there. I don't know.
But we kind of can in a way. This goes back to what I was discussing about the importance of respecting people's lived experience, because the level of complexity that we're talking about hundreds of compounds in the plant. We're talking about thousands of varieties that have different ratios, different presence of these compounds. We're talking about the human body that has all of these different receptors and ligands, and like that's incredibly complex too. Studying that in a laboratory is currently impossible. We don't have the tools to study that level of complexity. So if only there were millions of people who are already taking this plant into their body, and we could leverage that information. Like that's the way to do it, is to actually ask people like, how are you feeling? What are you using? What is your brain type? And the issue of like why we haven't got this information before is almost all research is funded through the federal government. And only do they not want to fund cannabis studies, but the cannabis community doesn't trust them for a second. Nobody wants the government involved in their cannabis. So for, what we were missing for a long time in cannabis research is people outside of academia, outside of the government, who are trusted within the community. Like I am always smoking with everyone at every event that I'm at, because I think it's really, really important that we show that it's not us versus you. It's just us. We just want to get this information. Yeah. So leveraging that and building trust within the community, I think is how we finally start to get answers and data that might help us solve at least some of these issues for as far as like complexity of data is concerned.
Well, I mean, and what you've brought up, and it's something that's never been brought up before, is that there's a whole section of data, that anecdata, that's literally not being considered, and that's the missing link. Yeah, that's again, if only there were millions of people who were consuming this plant, that we could get this wonderful information.
It makes me think of all that anecdata, all the actual data, and then we got these convolutional neural networks out there. Like maybe there's a time where Gabe's A through F could be a thing.
I mean, look, here's what I'll say. Nothing's impossible. But again,
I got you, buddy.
But again, I am, call me old fashioned, but I'm definitely
old fashioned.
Okay, fine. I'm definitely a trust the plant. Yeah, that's fine. And I'll accept that. But I'm definitely more of a trust the plant kind of person. Like I definitely like that. The natural ratio thought process, and go, look, man, this thing's been doing it for a long time. Who am I? I don't like the egocentric and human centric view that most people take on plants.
I think she actually helped you helped me kind of bust. Like maybe I don't want to make it. Maybe I don't want to make the pen. I just want people to be able to find the strain that works well for them.
And that I think is cool.
Yeah. And so I think you may have, I actually have a personal question as a cultivator, and I don't know if you can answer this question, but I'm going to throw it out at you. There's been, I've worked in some really big facilities with lots of data and monitoring and stuff like that. And we always tried to put together a relationship curve between CBG, THC, and CBN, and so as you know, CBG is the precursor. And then, I had always kind of looked for this curve where if you're harvesting at the right time, all the CBG should be gone in the plant, and you should have THC. And then, I worked with the guys at the grow off, a long time ago, and they had told me that while the curve to go from CBG to THC is kind of round, once you get to THC, it converts to CBN really quickly, like it dives off. So my question is to you, is that CBG to THC curve a real thing?
Is it valid? Is that a valid
You'll have a
use?
lot of people who are harvesting going, and they'll look at the numbers afterwards and they'll go, oh, it was really high in CBG. We should have harvested. We should have waited another week. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so CBG, I mean, that's a little tough because it's the precursor to more than just THC. So it's like if you're looking at it as like an energy funnel, like all of that energy is not necessarily going to THC. It depends on what that plant genetics are and what cannabinoids they're producing in general, because they might be funneling more energy to other cannabinoids as well. And I think the relationship between CBG and THC makes sense, but I wouldn't expect that to be necessarily like linear to CBN, because CBG to THC is enzymatic. There's a enzyme in the plant that's changing and folding CBG into THC, technically THCA, CBGA, but not to get into details.
Trying not to get crazy with that.
And then from THC to CBN is non-enzymatic. Like that is really just due to, degradation, right?
Yeah.
So I think that would be more environmental.
Makes perfect sense.
About like temperature and light and what the other factors are in that situation, which would cause that transformation to happen.
So question, now you got me thinking, because I'm like, what's that enzyme, and could you boost that enzyme?
Well, and I mean,
you can.
Short answer, yes.
Dude, I like where you're taking this.
Well, and it just, again, what I find, unfortunately, is all too common in cannabis is an oversimplification, right? And I think that happens a lot in cultivation. I think it happens a lot in breeding. I think it happens a lot when we talk about the testing and things like that. So I think that's another great example of saying, well, yeah, there's those relationships are there, but to look at it as that, as that linear and as that simplified is not getting the full story.
Well,
yeah, and we are seeing a lot of genetic manipulation at this enzymatic level that we're talking about, specifically talking about the hemp industry. The hemp industry has struggled for a really long time in staying compliant because it's almost impossible to, with classic hemp genetics, to be under 0.3%, especially the second you start extracting it, you're going to be concentrating whatever THC is in there and you're going to test hot every single time. And remediation is really hard, taking out that THC. So some new plant genetics are actually knocking out THCA or THCA synthase, which is what turns CBGA into THCA. They're knocking that out, so the plant is not.
It's like an enzymatic blocker, basically.
Yeah, so you're going to produce no THC. If that enzyme's not present, you're not going to produce THC, and then all that chemical energy is going to go towards CBDA synthase, and you're going to have a lot of, or whether it's CBG, whatever it is, it's going towards the other compliant cannabinoids, so you just don't have to worry about testing hot.
Dude, this is awesome.
I mean, again, some next level stuff that, again, you have the in all these other crops, it's been proven, you run it at this CC and you do this and all this, like the world of cannabis is so wide open.
Well, I'm pretty keen to point out to folks that like, there's no industry in the world where everybody at the top has no idea what the fuck they're doing. And, I tell people all the time, if we were surgeons, everybody'd be dead. Yeah. Because no one knows what they're doing. And that's why it's so refreshing to speak with someone like yourself, because not only have you been, you've been doing it, you've been doing the research for a lot of things. I mean, if you have a lot of papers written, obviously you're paving the way for a lot of, what people are going to know for
and the ability for additional research, right? Because that's creating that stepping stone, which is what science is. So there's an ability. It's like, what did Isaac Newton say? If I've seen, farther than others, it's only because I stood on the shoulders of giants, right? So you are creating a base, for this to go really, really amazing places. So really, thank you and phenomenal job.
Thank you. And yeah, like, to that point, like, we fully realize in every presentation we give, in every publication that we publish, like, we thank the legacy market. We thank everybody who's been in this industry for so long, because we would not have a place at the table if it weren't for all of the effort that everybody's put in. And we try to include people from the legacy market, from even like the legal market in different ways to just be part of this research. And we also encourage, you know, companies that have funds for research to either help us fund our studies or help fund other studies within the cannabis industry, because we need to be the ones doing this research. We can't rely on academia. We can't rely on the government. It really needs to be from within, from our community, especially thinking about like how valuable the data is. Like, we have data on everything from like cannabis and pregnancy, cannabis and driving, like these really sensitive topics. And we are so careful with who we share that data with, because if it got into the wrong hands, like everybody's like, you know, sell your data. You guys can make so much on your data. And it's like, of course we can, but we don't want to just sell it to anyone who's going to use that information in the wrong way and present the wrong narrative for the cannabis community. We built this on trust, and we are aiming to keep that trust. So we have to kind of keep it within our network of trusted scientists to make sure that we're building the right narrative and not contributing to the excessive fear mongering that we've seen going on for decades and decades with cannabis.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I think I speak for all of us and all of our listeners. Thank you for doing that and being careful and taking that seriously and really understanding, you know, what you have and the responsibility that's there on. And again, like you said, some very sensitive, but common and everyday subjects that, you know, has been very difficult to have any kind of narrative around, quite frankly. And I guess,
GRAMBO, you want to slide that up real quick?
And I was going to say, you know, even speaking to that, let's go into that,
let's
you know,
get
a little
into
bit.
The NAP.
Yeah. And as far as just, you know, your research and give you a little bit more of a platform to talk a little bit more about that.
So basically, you know, I want to talk about the network of applied pharmacognosy, right? Is that, did I say it right? I had to pull it up and have my phone tell me how to say that word. Just so I did it right.
Hey, you know,
but what inspired you to co-found the NAP, and what is your guys' primary mission?
Yeah. So what inspired us to start it is essentially we saw this huge gap, as I mentioned, like between consumers, academia, and the industry. There was really no one like connecting the dots and trying to do relevant research for the consumer, like consumer facing research. So with a focus on education as well, to make sure that people are educated on the different forms of consumption, the different chemistry, the different research coming out. So that's kind of where we started. And the reason we called it NAP, or the Network of Applied Pharmacognosy, is network really is like the network of people, of consumers. Applied is like the actual applications of how we use this medicine, because most research has nothing to do with how people are actually consuming it. It's just like a really, really, really unique, like niche topic that has nothing to do with consumption. And then pharmacognosy is the study of natural medicines. And this word was actually, if you break it down, pharmacognosy. Pharma is medicine and cognosy is the knowledge of. So before we had synthetic pharmaceuticals, all we had was the knowledge of nature, the knowledge of medicine. So pharmacognosy is actually like the OG pharmaceutical sciences. And it's what I have my degree in. And this word, they're like thinking of like vaporizing it because nobody can say it. So
I understand that a little bit.
At like a national level, you know, we have these huge like pharmacognosy networks, and they're like, should we just change our name to like natural products instead, because it's easier to say? And I'm like, no, like this is like there's so much history in this word.
Yeah.
So we included it in our name to essentially like resurrect this word. And we actually are seeing significant increases in the amount of people Googling pharmacognosy since we started this.
I was one of those people.
I was going to say, I think Josh is back there doing it right now.
So when you say you guys are a network, are you like kind of like a coalition? Like, are there pharmaceutical companies involved? Are there like who are some of the kind of members, I guess?
I wouldn't say other pharmaceutical companies, but it's a lot of other researchers or just like community experts within the cannabis community. And we don't just study cannabis. We have other projects going on right now with other medicinal plants like kava and kratom.
Fungus?
And And not yet, but we definitely plan on studying different kinds of mushrooms in the future. So we also, pharmacognosy kind of keeps us open to studying whatever natural products kind of come our way in the future.
I love that because really, I also think that, cannabis,
we've gotten away from it.
Well, and number one, we've gotten away from it. Number two, I also think that, it's so narrow-minded when people think, oh, I'm going to get into growing cannabis, and then they don't realize that it's just a plant, and there's a lot of really cool plants that we have a relationship with, and it's like, you can grow these other things too. You know what I mean? And even if it's something as simple as, a vegetable garden or houseplants or whatever, I mean, I believe in the word medicinal plants in a very broad term personally. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And like thinking of, the entourage effect, we always say this is like started in cannabis, but like natural products, people have been studying the entourage effect in other plants for decades.
Right.
This is a very, very common thing to study the different synergies in nature and how they work together to have these enhanced benefits, whether that's to combat antibiotic resistance or like even looking at poisons and venoms that different animals make. They're always a concoction of a bunch of different venomous compounds. It's never just one.
Right.
And this has always been studied in natural products, but in cannabis, like, because it's a lot of people's, first introduction to natural medicine, everything seems so like novel and new. But if you dive into natural product research, like all of this has been happening with so many medicinal plants. And to your point, like if you can grow cannabis, especially grow it well, you can grow any medicinal plant.
Totally. Yeah. Right. I'm like, guys, this is the hard one. You know what I mean? Even it's a weed. Yeah. Okay. But to get it what we want it to be and get
Smokable.
it, and yeah, right. So, there, well, I think what I'm seeing, is really a bridge that's being gapped or a gap, that's being bridged that I haven't seen previously. Right. And that is academia with the cannabis industry, which is there's not much that's been there to begin with. Yeah. And then circling that back in with the consumers. Yeah. That's where I go, whoa, okay. These are the things that we talked about. Didn't know how to necessarily, really
tie it in a bow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like we always, it's always kind of there on the tip of our tongue. It's like, well, how do we actually make this, anecdotal stuff that it's especially cannabis, right? It's a modern, storytelling tradition almost, if you really think about it. I mean, I remember, there wasn't books to begin with. I mean, I remember getting my first clones, and it was literally at a spiral notebook, and it's like, how do I do this? And so, that's, there is that oral tradition of cannabis, which I think is quite amazing. And it's one of the last things I feel like, has kept that tradition, in part because of the illegality of it.
And shout out to Dr. Raphael Meshulam, the guy who held this torch for us pretty much for decades solo. That guy. So I think there's a direct line from him to you, Dr. Riley. Respect.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. Huge respect to Dr. Meshulam, and may he rest in peace. He was an absolute legend in this industry. He really spearheaded a lot of the discoveries that led us to understanding the endocannabinoid system and how it worked, and a huge advocate for the plant. So shout out to him for sure.
No, this has been, again, very enlightening, and it's something where I hope it just opens up a lot of, our listeners' minds and again, help them bridge that gap, which I'm doing, currently as we sit here. And as far as where people can find you, things like that, I mean, is it something where is it basically online based? Do you get out and do any live talks, anything like that?
Yeah, I go to a lot of different conferences. Cool. I haven't solidified my schedule this year, so I can't tell you exactly where I'll be, but I am very abundant on social media. So anytime I'm going to go to a conference, I'll always put it on Instagram and let people know. So you can find me on all social medias, whether that's TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, at Cannabichem, CANNABICHEM. I'm the host of a podcast called The Bioactive Podcast, where I talk about how mostly cannabis, but other medicinal plants also work in your body. I talk to researchers. I talk about current research. I talk about just some of the work that we're doing in the nonprofit as well. It's super chill. It's sciencey, but approachable sciencey, I think. And then the last thing is I did recently write a book that is available for pre-order now. It's called Reefer Wellness. It's actually right behind me on the shelf. You might have seen it during this conversation.
Cool.
this is what it looks like. It's called Reefer Wellness. It talks about a lot of the topics that we discussed on this episode, whether that's consumption method, the different chemistry, whether it's talking about the different medicinal benefits, different cannabinoids, different terpenes, vaporization temperatures, all of that fun stuff. So it's available. It's available for pre-order now, and it's really using science to help reverse the stigma. And it's from both a stoner and a researcher perspective.
Well, and again, I love how you bring that together. And even you kind of already answered this question, was one of the things, was how are scientists and educators and whatnot, combating that stigma that surrounds cannabis. And I think one of the big things you're doing is constantly being out there, being out and about, going to conferences, sitting down with people, consuming with people, being approachable, right? Because that's the thing. I think a lot of times when you're in these positions where people are looking up to you, they almost assume, well, they're like, it's just little old me, you know what I mean? And when they get a chance to actually, partake or have an interaction with you, I know that's a very powerful experience for them. So keep doing your thing. I mean, again, it's something where I hope we get a chance to meet up on the road one of these days, and definitely want to go by University of Rhode Island and check out the plants. No doubt about it.
Yeah, seriously. Let me know when you're gonna head down there, because my friend Elizabeth would just love to give you a tour.
That would be fantastic. I guess maybe not quite last, but nearly. Do you have any advice that you'd give to somebody that's interested in pursuing a career in cannabis research or education, for that matter? Because this is all of a sudden becoming something that people can actually do, but there's not necessarily a lot of places to do it. So I don't know if you have any advice on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say first, do it for the plant. Don't do it for money, because that might not be the first step in the scientific.
Sounds like my farming career.
So yeah, do it for the plant. Do it for the love of the plant and the community. And honestly, if you are super loud and proud and passionate and doing a lot of your own research and education on your own time, applying to different programs, what it doesn't need to be graduate school. It can even be a single course that you might want to learn. You can even talk to somebody. If you go to these, I would highly recommend going to industry events, because networking is everything. I know a lot of people say LinkedIn is the way for this industry, but I've had a lot of horrible experiences on LinkedIn too. So I think, especially if you're a vibe reader, like I am, I really need to meet people to be oh, I want to work with you, or I don't want to work with you. And going to these events and talking to people and seshing with people and learning about what other people do and saying, wow, I didn't even know that job existed in the industry. Can you tell me more about that? Can I shadow you for a day? Whatever it is, meeting people in person is, I think, the best way to get into this industry. And once you do that and you build trust with a few people, they're happy to introduce you to more people. But that the way into the industry is still trust-based and word of mouth.
I love that you say that. And because I continue to say, this is still a handshake industry. There's been a lot of situations where I've had where it's wait a minute, you know this person and I know this person. Okay, you're good. We're good. We can do business together. Or the other
way around, saying, with that person.
Yeah, okay, now I know. Okay, we're good. And, I'm not going to name names here, you know what I mean? But it is one of those things where, we're big on that, you know what I mean? And we're big on relationship-based sales. We believe that, in our position being jug dealers as we are, people get to know us, they trust us, and then they buy from us, and that's been a process and that's why we like to we put out what we believe to be, unbiased, quality information. And we try to really work hard to bring in people with unbiased quality information. So I would say, from really the bottom of my heart and our whole community, thank you so much for taking the time. I don't know if you want to, I guess you kind of shout it out, let everybody know where you're at, all that good stuff. We'll make sure and post that.
Yeah. Everybody, I will also say, I am hella biased. I am for this plant. And I think
that's a good bias.
Is the way forward. And, I say that in my book just to start, if you're looking for a balanced perspective, I will talk about both sides, but I strongly believe that this plant has a lot of the answers, especially if you pair that with being able to listen to the plant, what the plant plant's trying to tell you, and, use that information to better your life. So, I think we've had a lot of biased researchers the other way.
I was about to say that we've had enough crap on the other side. You gotta push hard back on them. You know what I mean? So, kudos, keep doing what you're doing. Again, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. It's been an inspiring conversation. Everybody go out and get the book, Reefer Wellness. Hope to see you sometime soon on the road. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Peace. Thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it immensely.
Absolutely.
Cool conversation.
From the Jug Den. Till next time, everybody.
Peace.